Here's the thing about miracles. They show up when you're not looking. Jack woke at dawn Saturday, alone in the farmhouse. Tien had gone back to the city last night to pack supplies. Mom was coming at 9. He had 3 hours to make the place presentable. He started with the simple things: swept the floors, wiped down surfaces, set up the small table outside under the pomelo trees where they'd eat lunch. At 8:30 he heard the first motorbike. Too early. Mom wasn't supposed to arrive for another half hour. Jack walked to the front of the property and stopped. Uncle Dung's truck, packed with tools, shovels, rakes, pruning shears, buckets, and in the truck bed, sitting on sacks of fertilizer, was Luann. "Surprise," Luann called out, jumping down. "Thought you could use some help." How did you? Tien called me yesterday. Said you were doing the big reveal today." Luann grinned. "No way I'm missing the grand opening." Uncle Dung climbed out, already pulling on work gloves. "Where do you want to start?" Before Jack could answer, another motorbike appeared. Then another. Tien arrived first, her bike loaded with bags of groceries and cooking supplies. Behind her came Mum, riding with a neighbor who'd offered to drive her. And behind them, impossibly, was Hang, Luann's girlfriend, the one he'd bought that first farm for before they separated. She was carrying a box of seedlings. "Luann told me about your farm," Hang said, her smile genuine. "I thought you might want these, herbs and vegetables, starter plants." Jack stood there, overwhelmed, as they all piled out. All these people, all here, for him. Tien came to his side, took his hand, showed him the ring on her finger to the group. Mum gasped. "Jack, when?" "Thursday, at the property signing." Tien squeezed his hand. "I said yes." Mum's eyes filled with tears, good ones this time. She pulled them both into a hug. Okay, Uncle Dung interrupted, practical as always. "We can celebrate later. Right now, we have work to do." He looked at Jack. "What's the priority?" Jack's mind was spinning. He'd prepared for a quiet day showing Mum around. Maybe doing a little cleanup. But this? The pomelo trees? He said finally. "They need pruning, and the fence on the north side is falling down." "I'll take the fence," Luann volunteered. "Hang, you help with the garden plot? On it?" Uncle Dung grabbed pruning shears. "Show me which trees need attention." Tien headed toward the house with her groceries. "Mum and I will handle lunch. You all work." And just like that, they scattered. To work? To help? To build? Jack stood in the middle of his new property, watching his mother laugh with Tien as they unpacked food. Watching Luann measure fence posts with the same careful precision he brought to his architecture work. Watching Hang kneel in the dirt, planting seedlings with practiced hands. Uncle Dung appeared beside him. "You going to stand there all day, or you going to help?" Jack laughed, grabbed a shovel. "Let's work." They started with the trees. Uncle Dung showed him which branches to cut, which to leave, how to shape the tree for better fruit production, how to read the bark for signs of disease or stress. "These trees are good," Uncle Dung said, running his hand down a trunk. "Healthy, strong. They'll give you years of harvest if you treat them right." Across the property, Jack could hear Luann hammering fence posts, could see Hang carefully transplanting seedlings into neat rows, could smell something cooking from the kitchen where Mum and Tien were working. This was real, this was happening. By mid-morning they'd pruned 6 trees, the fence was half repaired, the garden plot was cleared and planted. The house looked lived in, warm, ready. Jack called a break. Everyone gathered under the largest pomelo tree, where Tien had set out water and fruit. "I can't believe you all came," Jack said, looking around at them. "Where else would we be?" "Where Tien had set out water and fruit," Luann asked simply. Mum reached over and touched Jack's arm. "Can I see everything? The house? The pond?" "Of course." Jack stood, offered his hand. "Let me show you." He walked her through the property slowly, showed her the pomelo trees, explaining Uncle Dung's pruning lessons, led her to the pond, where dragonflies danced on the surface, brought her to the small house. "It's not much yet," Jack said, "but we'll fix it up, make it home." Mum stood in the doorway, taking it all in, the simple kitchen, the clean floors, the cradle in the corner. She saw it. Of course she saw it. Jack, she whispered, the previous owners left it, for the next family. Mum walked over slowly, touched the cradle with gentle fingers. Your father made one like this, for you, when you were born. She looked up at him, eyes wet. He'd be so happy to see this, to see you here. Jack's throat tightened. I wish he could see it. He can, Mum smiled through tears. I believe that, wherever he is, he sees you, and he's proud. Outside, someone called that lunch was ready. They gathered around the table under the trees. Tien and Mum had made a feast: rice, stir-fried vegetables, grilled pork, soup, simple food made with care. Uncle Dung raised his water glass. To new beginnings, to family, Mum added. To Jack and to Tien, Luan said, grinning at the ring on Tien's finger. They ate and laughed and told stories. Luan shared memories of growing up with Jack, of the trouble they'd gotten into as kids. Hang talked about her own journey with farming, the lessons she'd learned. Uncle Dung gave advice about pomelo cultivation, market prices, distribution networks. Mum just watched, smiling, finally at peace. After lunch they worked again, finished the fence, completed the pruning, planted the last of the seedlings. By late afternoon, the property looked transformed. Not perfect, not finished, but alive, cared for, loved. As the sun started to set, people began packing up to leave. Luan was the first to say goodbye. He clasped Jack's shoulder, held it firm. You did it, brother. You actually did it. Couldn't have done it without you. The projects you took, the support. Stop. Luan shook his head. That's what friends do. Besides, you're doing something I'm still too scared to do. Following your gut instead of the safe path. Hang joined them, wiping dirt from her hands. The garden will need regular watering, and in about 2 weeks you should fertilize. I wrote down some notes. She handed Jack a folded paper. Call me if you have questions. Thank you, for the seedlings, for coming. Luan told me what you're building here. It's brave. She glanced at the house, at Tien visible through the window. She's lucky. You both are. Uncle Dung was next. He surveyed the work with satisfaction. Good day. Solid progress. Uncle, I can't thank you enough. The land, the advice, coming today. Jack, Uncle Dung's voice was firm. Your father was my best friend. When he died, I promised him I'd look after you and your mother. Today isn't charity, it's family. Those words hit deeper than Jack expected. Family, not obligation. Family. Uncle Dung climbed into his truck, then paused. One more thing. The pomelos will be ready to harvest in about 3 weeks. I know a wholesaler who'll give you fair prices. I'll introduce you. You don't have to. I know, I want to. He started the engine. See you next weekend. We'll work on that drainage problem. As the truck pulled away, Jack turned to find Mum standing by the pomelo tree where they'd eaten lunch. She was touching the bark, her eyes distant. Mum, I was just thinking. Your father planted fruit trees once. Mangoes. We were so young, barely married. He said, we'll eat the fruit with our grandchildren. She smiled sadly. He never got to see you grow up. Never met Tien. But standing here today, watching everyone work together, I felt him. Does that sound crazy? No. Jack came to stand beside her. Not crazy at all. I've been carrying so much guilt, Jack, about the land deal, about you having to sell your car, about being a burden. Mum, let me finish. She took a breath. Today, watching you here, seeing how happy you are, how everyone showed up for you, I realized something. Maybe the land deal failing was a gift. Maybe losing money was the cost of finding out what really matters. She turned to him. You're not running from anything, Jack. You're running toward something, toward this life, toward Tien, toward peace. She touched his face. That's not failure, that's wisdom. Jack felt something break loose in his chest, some final piece of guilt or shame or fear. I'm going to make this work, Mum. The farm, the debt, all of it. I know you will. But Jack, even if you don't, even if the pomelos fail, or the market crashes, or whatever else happens, you've already succeeded. You chose love over image, family over status. That's the real victory. She hugged him, held on tight. Your father would be so proud, she whispered again. And I am too. When she pulled back, Tien was there, holding car keys. I'll drive you home, Mum. It's getting dark. Will you come visit me next week? Both of you? Of course, Tien said. I want to show you the wedding plans. Mum's face lit up. Wedding plans. Oh, we have so much to discuss. They drove off together, Mum already talking excitedly about venues and flowers and guests. Jack stood alone in the fading light, looked around at everything they'd accomplished in one day. The pruned trees stood cleaner, healthier. The new fence marked the property line clearly. The garden plot showed neat rows of seedlings, each one a promise of food to come. The house looked less empty, more lived in. This was his, really his. He walked to the pond, sat on the edge, watched the sky turn orange and pink. His phone buzzed. A text from Luann. Thanks for letting us be part of this. Felt good to build something real for once. Then another from Hang. Those seedlings are hardy. They'll survive even if you forget to water them for a few days. Don't stress. Then Uncle Dung. Your father and I used to talk about retiring to the countryside, growing fruit, living simply. He'd love seeing you do it. Jack read them all twice. Saved them, these people, this support, this love. He heard a motorbike, looked up to see Tien returning. She parked and walked over, sat beside him at the pond's edge. Mum wouldn't stop talking about the wedding. She has opinions on everything already. Jack laughed. Of course she does. They sat in silence, watching the water reflect the sunset. Today was perfect, Tien said quietly. It was. Everyone showing up like that, working together. It felt like, she paused, searching for words. It felt like we're not doing this alone. We're not, she leaned against his shoulder. I'm scared, Jack, about the farm, about whether we can really make it work, about money and harvests and all of it. Me too. But I'm also happy. Happier than I've been in years. Same. The sky deepened to purple. Stars started appearing. We should head back to the city, Tien said. But neither of them moved. Or we could stay, just tonight. Sleep here for the first time. Tien turned to look at him. We don't have beds, or blankets, or we have the floor, and each other. Jack stood, offered his hand. What do you say? First night in our new home? She took his hand. Yes, absolutely yes. They went inside. The house was dark, empty but somehow welcoming. They found some old blankets in a cabinet, left by the previous owners probably. Spread them on the floor in the main room. Lay down together under the windows that let in starlight. This floor is hard, Tien said. We'll get beds soon. And curtains, and furniture, and fix that leak in the roof. And paint the walls. They kept listing things, their voices getting quieter, until sleep took them. Jack's last thought before drifting off was simple. We're home. Jack woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of birds in the pomelo trees. Tien was already up, standing in the doorway, looking out at their land. Morning, Jack said, his voice rough with sleep. She turned, smiled. Come see this. He joined her at the door. The morning light made everything golden. The trees, the pond, the freshly planted garden. Dew sparkled on the leaves. The air smelled clean, green, alive. It's beautiful, Tien whispered. They stood there, shoulders touching, watching their farm wake up. I'm going to make breakfast, Jack said. Real breakfast, our first meal here. They had eggs from the groceries Tien brought yesterday. Rice left over from lunch. Some vegetables. Jack cooked while Tien made tea. And they ate sitting on the front step, watching the sun climb higher. Simple food, simple moment, perfect. After eating, they walked the property together. Checked the seedlings, already settling into the soil. Examined the fence Luann had repaired. Sturdy, straight. Stood under the pomelo trees and looked up at the branches they'd pruned yesterday. 3 weeks until harvest, Jack said. Uncle Dung thinks we'll get a good yield. And then we sell. Pay down some debt. Buy more seedlings. Start the cycle. Tien nodded. Practical. Real. We should make a list. Everything that needs doing. They spent the morning planning. Wrote down repairs, Improvements, expenses, calculated timelines and budgets made it concrete. By noon they had a plan, rough but workable. We should go back to the city, Tien said. Pack up, start moving our things here. You sure? Once we do this it's real, no going back. She looked at him steadily. I've been sure since I bought those harvest baskets. This is what I want, Jack. You, this land, this life. They locked up the house, rode back to the city together, spent the next week in motion. Jack handed off his final company projects to Luann, met with clients, explained the transition, closed accounts, shifted everything to dormant status. Tien gave notice at her apartment, packed her things, sorted through what to keep and what to leave behind. They worked separately but parallel, dismantling their city lives piece by piece. Friday evening, Jack stood in his empty apartment. Everything packed, everything ready. His phone rang. "Mom, how are you feeling?" she asked. "Good, scared, excited. That's how you're supposed to feel." A pause. "Jack, I've been thinking. That old plot of land, the one that caused all this trouble, the development deal finally came through." Jack's heart stopped. "What?" "The developer called today. They're moving forward. Different plans. But they still want the land. They're offering 3 times what I paid. 3 times. That would cover the debt. All of it. With money left over." "Mom, that's an answer. Maybe the answer we've been waiting for." Her voice was warm. "See, everything does work out. Just not on our timeline." After hanging up, Jack sat in the empty apartment processing. The debt, gone. The pressure, lifted. They could breathe now. Really breathe. He called Tien immediately. Told her, heard her gasp. "Jack, that's incredible. I know. We can fix the house properly now. And the drainage. And we can take our time, build it right." They talked for an hour, reimagining everything with this new reality. The relief was overwhelming. Saturday morning, they moved the last of their things to the farm, filled the small house with their belongings, hung the old owner's photographs in the living room, right beside space for their own future memories, made it home. That evening, they cooked dinner in their kitchen, ate at their table, walked their land as the sun set. "We did it," Tien said, looking around. "We actually did it." Jack pulled her close. "We did." 3 weeks later, the pomelos were ready. They harvested with Mum, Uncle Dung, Luann, and Hang all helping, filled basket after basket with golden fruit. Uncle Dung's wholesaler contact came, examined the quality, and offered a fair price. Their first sale. Their first income from the land. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. That night they celebrated with a simple meal under the pomelo trees. The same spot where they'd eaten that first lunch with everyone. Mum raised her glass, to new beginnings and to knowing what matters. They drank, ate, talked about plans for next season. Later, after everyone left, Jack and Tien sat by the pond. The cradle was in the house now, in the corner of the bedroom, waiting. No rush, but there, a promise. "You happy?" Tien asked. Jack thought about it. Really thought. A year ago he'd measured success in contracts and cars and city apartments, in image and status and the appearance of having made it. Now he measured it in pomelo harvests, and repaired fences and his mother's smile. In Tien's hand and his and the land under his feet and the knowledge that he was exactly where he belonged. "Yeah," he said. "I'm happy." She leaned against him. "Me too." The stars came out. The frogs sang by the pond. The pomelo trees rustled in the evening breeze. And in the small house on 2 hectares of land, a man who'd lost everything discovered he'd gained what he actually needed. Not wealth, not status, not the image of success, but peace, love, family, purpose, the real things, the things that last. And that was enough.